Michael Wise, to my right, is a co-founder with Ross Ufberg, a little bit more to my right, of New Vessel Press, an independent publishing house specializing in translations of foreign literature. He spent 5 years as a Vienna-based correspondent for Reuters and the Washington Post, and he writes about architecture, culture, and foreign affairs. He's the author of the book Capital Dilemma, Germany's Search for a New Architecture of Democracy. And his writing has appeared in many publications, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic, Foreign Policy, Travel and Leisure, and Art News. Ross Ufberg is a literary translator from Russian and Polish, a writer, and also a PhD candidate in the Slavic department at Columbia University. His translations include the nonfiction memoir, or the nonfiction book, Memoir of a Gulag Actress, the memoir of Polish writer Mara Kłasko, Beautiful 20-somethings, and the book we're going to talk about today, The Good Life Elsewhere by Vladimir Lorchenkov, who's a Moldovan author writing in Russian. Although I have to say that Ross's shining achievement for me is having taught Paul Giamatti how to say, "I crush you, insect," on the set of Spider-Man a couple of years ago. That's really like the peak of translation, as far as I'm concerned.
The peak of pay for translation.
The peak so yeah, could you tell us a little bit about this book, The Good Life Elsewhere?
Sure. Actually, it's funny that we're here talking about it because everything's coming full circle. Because the way that I found out about this book, the way that Michael and I found out about this book was at a bridge event. So,
really? Okay.
For Mikhail Shishkin, whom Chad publishes.
Wow.
And afterwards, I was talking to Shishkin's agent. Is it Julia or Natasha? Natasha. And yeah, Natasha Bank or Banki, who is a Russian literary agent working in Sweden. And Michael and I were just starting the press, and so we got in touch, and she sent a whole bunch of interesting books, and this was the one that sort of grabbed us the most. So that's how we first found out about the book, and it's sort of a really funny, zany, sort of absurd novel, although the saddest part about it is that it's maybe plausible. It's about a group of Moldovan villagers who are trying to escape from their destitute, sort of ravaged village. Their village has been ravaged by alcoholism, by the Soviet Union, by the years since the unraveling of the Soviet Union, and so they're trying to escape, and they pay a bunch of human traffickers to take them from Moldova to Italy, the promised land, and they just continuously get duped. So they're put in the back of a caravan for days, and they're told they're traveling, and they end up just basically in a ravine right outside of the capital city of Moldova. So they've just been driving in circles for days, and they've paid the money they've been collecting for years to these traffickers who dupe them. And there's a guy who builds a submarine to travel from Moldova to Italy, although Moldova's landlocked. There's just a whole bunch of sort of crazy misadventures that take place in the book, and it's really funny. It's really bizarre, and it was a fun book, I think, to work together on with the author and with Michael.
Yeah. So what was it like to change roles from co-publishers to translator and editor? Did you have to renegotiate your relationships in any way?
This was fairly early on in the the brief history of our company, so it didn't require too much changing of gears. Ross was translating from the Russian, and I don't speak Russian, so in this book I was reading it really just for its readability, whether things were comprehensible, whether the tone was consistent. And it is a very funny book and very zany. It has sort of madcap and slapstick elements. There were times when I felt maybe it went a little overboard, and there were passages that were trimmed as a result of that. So I think it was helpful to have a reader who was not as involved in the book as the translator was, and that's what Susan was talking about. Someone who can step, Susan and Katie, you can step back from it a bit. So that's.
And you talked to the author as well? He was involved in the process?
Yeah, I talked to the author. Here's the book. I'm going to stop holding it. I'm going to put it down. Here's the book. It's very beautiful. So I was talking to the author, like in many other countries, there's basically no editing that goes on for most writers in Moldova, although this book was originally published in Russia. And there was almost no editing. And so there were things like, there was a village meeting and there are like 36 people at the meeting, yet somehow like 96 hands are raised. And so you know, you have to write to dear Vladimir, you sure it's 96 hands? So just things like that, you know, basic checking that's in some ways not the translator's job, but it is the translator's job. I mean, I think every translator does that sort of stuff. I mean, it's any reader's job to say, hey, basic math. So there was stuff like that when I was in communication with the writer. And then there were, as Michael said, there were some passages that, you know, you're really in this text and you're like, oh, this is so funny. And then Michael read it and he's like, we got to cut this back, you know. And there are just differences in humor and differences in how many times you can repeat the same joke in various languages before it stops being funny. So for the trimming, Michael wrote to the author.
We also changed the title of the book,
really? Oh,
which is one of the only books we've done that with. We've done it with another one, which is forthcoming. But that was an interesting. I think the Russian title is Vsia tam budem, We'll All Be There, which makes sense for the original readership. I think the agent's title was Land of Milk and Honey, which we felt had somewhat Zionist overtones. Not that we opposed that, but in this case, we didn't think it was appropriate. And again, it was early in the business, and so we had a lot of fun just playing with possible titles. The Good Life Elsewhere also sort of unwittingly echoes the Milan Kundera novel, Life is Elsewhere. But I think originally the author wasn't so happy with the proposed title, and then he was convinced. So.
Yeah, we went through many different proposed titles, and it was a tough sell. And then I think at some point, Milk and Honey definitely didn't work, and We'll All Be There, Vsia tam budem. It makes sense in Russian because it's an idea that's, you know, a Russian idea, like it's paradise. We'll all see each other in the afterlife, but we don't say that in English. So I just remember many emails back and forth trying to tweak the title, and I don't remember how the author agreed to it, but maybe we just exhausted him. Fine.
The French title is Italie mon amour, which we...
Oh, interesting. Okay. Not exactly.
Right.
So, Michael, you've been a writer and a journalist for a long time, and I wondered, in that time you've undoubtedly been edited, and I wonder if you sort of keep that experience in the back of your mind when you're working as an editor, if that weighs into it.
I've been thinking about that recently as we've been editing different translations, and I mean, both Ross and I are new to publishing. We have probably less experience than many of the publishers who are here. And of course, I've read a lot, and as a writer, I've been edited. I guess what I have valued the most when and I think what is a very good approach for an editor is to make the writer feel like they've actually done the work, and they've come up with the solutions and improved the text in the end, rather than having it come from on high down. And sometimes, as a matter of time limits, we're not able to sort of prompt the translator with each, if it's not Ross, you know, another translator who's working with us to prompt with alternative solutions. So I guess I've thought about that, the role of an editor as being somebody who encourages the author rather than imposes your own vision of the book, or your own language on the translator.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add, Ross?
Yeah, I was actually translating The Good Life Elsewhere was a very good editing experience for me. I had translated books for academic presses and translated a behemoth of a book that was 500 pages, and I wished that I had a very good editor on that. I mean, reading it now, I sort of think some things could have been improved, and so it was very nice having an editor whom I respected, and also with whom I could speak very frankly. You know, I mean, we didn't have to sort of pussyfoot around anything. He could say, "Listen, this doesn't work," and it's okay. You know, I know where he's coming from. So that was, I would say, a very good learning experience. And we've just, I think, had a lot of fun editing together. I mean, most of the stuff we publish, I speak Russian and Polish, Michael speaks German and French, so usually we're reading either the original or a translation, because most things are usually translated into, many things are translated into French or German, if it's not the original language, much earlier than the English translation appears. So we've had a lot of fun sort of comparing translations. We're editing a Russian book right now that has a German translation, and I'm reading the Russian. We just finished editing a French translation where I was really sort of the blind editor, going completely off of, you know, the English translation, but Michael is reading the translation and the original, and so sometimes I would make comments and Michael would say, you know, no, you're off because the French translation says this, and this is, you know, this is how we should navigate the problem, with some more insight into the issue than I have. So it's been really fun being able to edit together. It's really, we both edit a lot. I mean, I think we're particularly heavy-handed, but we're very thorough. I think we spend a lot of time doing it, and so that's been, you know, it's like sort of you have an extra set of eyes. Mm-hmm. Very nice.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things that I really love about New Vessel is that I think you guys often sort of publish these books from like parts of Europe, or sort of narratives that that are mixed in that way, where like immigration is a concern, or where someone has like 2 or 3 pasts or 2 or 3 identities. And I know you have another author in the festival. Could you tell us a little bit about that book and that person and what that experience was like?
That book is Mariana Gaponenko's Who is Martha? And I don't think Mariana's here today, but Mariana is Ukrainian who writes in German and writes in incredibly beautiful and very Baroque, elaborate German. The book is about a 96-year-old ornithologist who lives in Odessa and is told he has cancer, and instead of being treated, he moves to Vienna, where he lived as a child, and checks into the Imperial Hotel, into the luxury suite, and it's about how he faces his final days in great splendor, and looking back on his past, and friendships that he's made or not had, and relationships that he's not had, and his relationship to music and to Vienna. In some ways it's a very Viennese book, and it's really, really beautiful.
I'm trying to think if I had read any of that before we bought the book, or you had just read it.
That I read and told you about, and I think there wasn't even an excerpt of that. So sometimes, like with the Russian book, Oblivion, which we just by Sergei Lebedev, that we've just been editing, Fischer Verlag had published that in German, and I read a bit of it in German. Ross read the whole thing in Russian, so we kind of give each other reader reports, and you know, I think Ross is particularly is a great enthusiast, and sometimes he drags me along on books, sometimes I drag him along. So, what's really been fun is when there have been books that we can see in many different languages. This book, Oblivion, was published by Verdier in France and S. Fischer Verlag in Germany, and Nina Boyce, who's the translator, did an absolutely awesome job on the book, and she's a fantastic translator, and it's a beautifully written book, but it was very difficult. It's a lot about geology. There's a portion which is really about geology and mining, and it's really fantastic. She did a great job, but it was really very valuable to be able to read both the French and the German, also to see the very different approaches that were taken by those two houses. The Verdier is incredibly faithful to the text, almost verbatim. Fischer reworded considerably, cut massively, and then Ross was editing from the Russian. So, you know, but together bring those different perspectives was I think very valuable, and I think is something that we really enjoy doing.
That book, it was an incredible translation job. It's just sort of memory enfolded in memory enfolded in memory. The author's email is swanpost@gmail.com. I mean, it's very Proustian. And yeah, it was sort of an amazing editing experience because it was particularly intense. And we did a lot of editing just because it's a massive book and it's really, really intense. But that was a lot of fun, and it was nice to hear, to check the Russian version, and then Michael would check the French and German. So it's a really cool dynamic, and I think it's editing is one of the most fun parts about doing this.
Aside from wallowing in cash bathtubs.
Of course, yeah.
Right.
Stuffing envelopes and going to the post office.
Right. No, and stuff like this. I mean, getting to meet Mariana, our author in the festivals, has been an incredible amount of fun. We're very grateful to the Festival Neue Literatur for bringing her here. And she is sort of every bit what you'd imagine after reading her very Baroque, very sort of, I don't know, it's this larger-than-life novel about this, on the surface, this sort of unassuming character, this 96-year-old ornithologist who's never really had a love life. His great passion has been birds, but she succeeds in sort of putting all of the plumage into the novel. And it's been great to meet her because she, in fact, is adorned with plumage herself. I mean, she's a very colorful character, and so that's also an incredible amount of fun.
That's great. Would you tell the story about the horses that you told me before the event?
Sure.
Just for the...
You know it better.
Mariana's next book involves horses and horse racing in Vienna, and every time she does a book, she does incredibly detailed research. And for who is Martha, she spent time at the Konrad Lorenz Institute for Ornithology in Austria. She learned all about all sorts of Central European species. For the next book, she learned to drive a 4-horse carriage. And there are wonderful videos online. Sometimes these author promotional videos are kind of hard to take, but this one is absolutely beautiful. And she's so charming, and her character really comes through, and she's with the horses and driving. And she spent just massive amounts of time doing that.
Bought 4 horses, actually. And she was telling us last night at dinner that the horses are much more expensive than her own lifestyle. Their apartment is much more expensive than hers.
Than her stalls. Right.
Great. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up and move on to the next pair. But thank you so much, Michael and Ross. That was amazing.